Okay, this is a continuation of the last video. Now I'm basically going to focus a little more on scientific discussion, or Holden as I've christened him. I don't know what his real name is. Big words was what he said almost right at the beginning, reading the title, I think. That was a common response. I think among all of us, we saw these big words and we're like, oh yeah, you know, scientific paper. And I've noticed that a couple of other people have joined the experiment too. I'm not going to discuss their responses too much in depth because I haven't watched them all, but I watched Bubonic Nate, Nate, I think. I watched the first part of his, and I noticed that he also he has a problem with big words. So that's kind of a genre distinction. What did SD say? Oh, yeah, the words are anchored in academic discourse, is what he said. I think that's cool, and that shows that, you know, he has an understanding of somewhat of where meaning comes from and how we create it. Anchors. That's interesting. That's an interesting metaphor, the anchor. Because, well, I don't know if an anchor is the best metaphor, because when I think of like structuralism, I think of like a structure. I think of a building. You know how they build buildings and they can't get down all the way to bedrock, so what they have to do is they actually have to sink pilings into the soil or mud or whatever it happens to be underneath it, clay or gravel or whatever, and the building of is built on top of these pilings, and the pilings are held in there by pure friction, simply by, like, they're not on any kind of bedrock, they're just held suspended in, it might even be sand they're in, and it's held there simply by the fact that there's all this friction of all these other particles and bits kind of holding it together. Like, no piece by itself is going to stand like one of these pilings, or, you know, or all this sand or whatever. So I find that a good analogy for structuralism, I guess. And, you know, I don't understand too much of that, so like, don't, like, you can point out how that's wrong or whatever, but I kind of like that analogy. That I like that metaphor. SD, he read things over and over again. I think that's a strategy that we all used. Everyone that I've watched so far, if they don't understand a passage, they do check it over again. And sometimes we check for typos, we check for style errors. We're like, oh, did they really mean that, or is that maybe a typo? Or is that like a grammatical error? And there were grammatical errors in there, and there was a point where, you know, you question, like, should they have used that? Should they have used that terminology or that way of conveying the meaning? And then, of course, we all put it into our own words, and I saw this a lot more with Holden or SD than I did with myself and with Azrienoch. Maybe I just noticed it more, but I did see him almost every sentence. He was putting his own spin on it, putting it in words that he could understand. And I don't know if that's a result of his education or of the fact that English is a second language for him, so he has to translate it into Danish and then back into English. I don't know. Referring to shift workers, that's something that a couple of us picked up on, because kind of it's a personal experience. It's a word that we do know. We can latch onto it. It's an anchor, but it's also like a key to another field, because it opens up. Like, you might not have been considering using shift workers in your language, in your approach to this text at all, or you may not have considered that at all, and then shift workers comes up, and it opens up this whole other space in your mind, that like another room, and gives you this key to another room, with all these things that are associated with shift work and with the night shift. Not everything, mind you, because that would be a very large room, a very large field, but it gives you a few connections that your mind could then pursue and possibly bring into the language that you're using. Of course, we don't seem to access all of this information at once. At least not using language, we don't do this, because language is one-dimensional, while our minds are structured in 3 dimensions, I believe. I think it or maybe more, actually, when you consider all the connections that are available. I think it satisfies us to know that we have heard the term shift workers, and it conjures up at least some sense of experience and thought that we might be able to access more about these terms should we so desire from our minds. Holden mentions that we might not be able to find this term in the dictionary, but I actually think a better way to understand our thought relationship to this term is to imagine if we had to write a dictionary entry for the word, specifically keeping in mind the context that it's appearing in at this time, at this moment in language, because it would involve the things that are related very closely to it in the kind of network of the mind and of concepts. Is that true? Is that even a valid metaphor? It might not be, but we'll work with it for now. We don't actually have to do this, of course, all the time with language in our minds or out loud, but as long as we're satisfied that we think that we could, we can be satisfied with the meaning of the word as it relates to the present discussion. Even though shift workers seems to be a key, the word, at other points Holden appeared to still lack certain keys, though, like a definition of the word circadian. And I think that was a major detriment, because if you understand those few, well, I don't know how many keys exactly there would be, it'd be different for each person, but enough keys missing and you don't have a coherent text. And I think that was the case with lacking circadian. I think he knows what it means now, but at the beginning. I noticed Holden was also confused, I'm calling him Holden still, but that's okay, was confused by left and right and this whole graph thing, and he thought it was part of the body. Oh, and another thing I noticed is that shift appears in 3 different contexts in this text, the word shift, because there's shifting on a graph, there's shifting like from one place to another, and then there's shift workers. It appears 3 times. Do these people have like some kind of subconscious fetish with the word shift? Maybe they do. I don't know. And shift is a key on the keyboard. Wow, there's a conspiracy, I think. Strategies are mostly unconscious, or at least, you know, there's this whole conscious-unconscious idea of thought. And for example, in this case, Holden said, I didn't think I was using any strategies, but Scoutie pointed out to him, oh, yeah, you're doing this, 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 and this. So was he unconscious of it? Well, I guess he didn't have the concept of strategies in his mind, so in that sense he was unconscious, but he was using strategies. However, before this exchange, he was the same person. He was doing the same thing whether he called it strategizing or not. We might say, well, he was unconsciously strategizing, which would be true, except that even the concept of strategy in this context was also absent from his unconscious as well as his conscious. It wasn't present at all. Do you see what I'm saying? Language is responsible for this artificial distinction between conscious and unconscious. It's language that tells us that. We can say that we are conscious of something only when we have a word for it. And that concludes my analysis of scientific discussion and Azrienoch and myself. Thank you for watching, if you are even watching.